The air in Mexico City doesn't just sit, it vibrates. On Tuesday night, that vibration was a physical weight, a collective lung capacity of 1 million people exhaling 40 years of frustration into the rainy night air. Somewhere in the middle of that dense, ecstatic heat, the oxygen simply ran out. While the world celebrated a tactical masterclass at the Estadio Azteca, 4 families were beginning a lifetime of silence. This is the story of a controlled collapse. It is the story of what happens when a governing body's desire for a global spectacle outpaces a city's physical ability to contain it. We are told these events are accidents. We are told they are unpredictable tragedies born of passion. The evidence suggests something much colder. To understand the deaths on the Paseo de la Reforma, you have to understand the desperation that preceded them. Mexico is a nation that breathes football, but for 4 decades, that breath has been shallow. Not since 1986 had they tasted the euphoria of a knockout win on home soil. That history is a ghost that haunts every player who puts on the green shirt. When Javier Aguirre led his men out against Ecuador, he wasn't just managing a team. He was trying to exorcise his own failures from 2002 and 2010. The stadium was a pressure cooker. An electric storm delayed the kickoff for an hour, as if the sky itself was trying to hold back the inevitable. But once the clouds parted, the floodgates opened. On the pitch, it was beautiful. There is no other word for it. Gilberto Mora, a 17-year-old with the composure of a veteran and the feet of a dancer, dictated the rhythm of the game. He represents the new Mexico, a generation unburdened by the failures of the past. When Julian Quiñones scorched into space and hammered the ball into the roof of the net, the city didn't just cheer, it buckled. The second goal from Raúl Jiménez was the poetic closure the country craved, a veteran pouncing on an error, a legacy secured. The 2-0 scoreline was a signal. It was the permission the public needed to flood the streets. The Paseo de la Reforma is one of the grandest boulevards in the world. It is wide, iconic, and flanked by the history of a revolution. At its heart stands the Angel of Independence. This is where the celebration converged. 1 million people. Try to visualize that. It is a sea of humanity so vast that the individual ceases to exist. The city had prepared. They had closed 2 kilometers of road. They had banned alcohol. They had installed giant screens to disperse the crowd. They did everything the handbook suggested. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. As the final whistle blew at the Azteca, the density at the Angel reached a critical mass. In crowd science, there is a point where a liquid becomes a solid. When you reach 7 people per square meter, the crowd no longer moves by individual will. It moves like water. It sways. It surges. If one person slips, a hole opens, and the weight of hundreds pours into it. This is not a stampede. People do not run over each other. They are squeezed. They are compressed until their ribs cannot expand. They die standing up. The reports from the city's health department are clinical and devastating. A 44-year-old man, a 19-year-old woman, a 48-year-old woman. All 3 died of asphyxiation. Their lungs were physically prevented from drawing air by the sheer pressure of their fellow fans' joy. A 4th victim, a man in his 30s, suffered a cardiac arrest following severe seizures. These were not victims of violence. They were victims of volume. They were the collateral damage of a victory that was too big for the container it was poured into. Video footage from the night shows the terrifying mechanics of the crush. Near the monument, you can see the shock waves traveling through the crowd. These are literal physical waves of pressure that toss grown men around like corks in an ocean. You see faces turned upward, gasping for air that isn't there. You see the frantic, rhythmic waving of hands, the universal signal for "I can't breathe," being mistaken by those further back as more cheering. The music was too loud, the chanting was too constant, the joy was too deafening to hear the sound of ribs cracking. We have to look at the institutional failure here. FIFA and the local organizing committees market these tournaments as festivals of football. They encourage the fan zone model because it creates the perfect B-roll for broadcast partners. It looks incredible on a drone shot. 1 million people in green shirts screaming under a monument is a marketing dream. But that dream has a physical cost. When you concentrate that many people into a single urban corridor, you are flirting with disaster. The mayor, Clara Brigada, had warned people to stay away. She knew the capacity had been breached hours before the game even started. But how do you tell a nation that has waited 40 years for this moment to stay home? You can't. The authorities point to the pyrotechnics as the trigger. They claim a few rogue flares caused a localized panic. This is a convenient narrative. It shifts the blame onto unruly fans rather than systemic planning failures. If a safety plan can be dismantled by a single flare, it was never a safety plan. It was a prayer. The reality is that the infrastructure of Mexico City, as robust as it is, was never designed to hold the concentrated emotional output of 20 million residents reacting to a singular event. The margin for error was razor thin, and it vanished the moment the second goal went in. President Claudia Sheinbaum has promised an investigation by the Attorney General. They will look at the police cordons. They will look at the placement of the giant screens. They will likely find a few scapegoats in the middle management of the city's security apparatus, but they will not look at the root cause. They will not look at the relentless expansion of these tournaments. They will not look at how the commercialization of the World Cup requires an ever-increasing scale of public activation that cities simply cannot safely manage. The tragedy wasn't a failure of the safety plan. It was the inevitable result of a business model that treats human density as a marketing metric. This is the pivot point where we have to ask what football has become. It is no longer just a sport. It is a massive, shifting tectonic plate of geopolitical soft power and immense capital. When Mexico won, it wasn't just a sporting victory. It was a proof of concept for the 2026 World Cup. It was meant to show that the country could host the world. Instead, it showed that even with the best intentions, the sheer scale of modern football is becoming unmanageable. We are building stadiums that are cathedrals of glass and steel, but the streets outside remain the same width they were a century ago. The contrast on Tuesday night was sickening. In one frame of a split screen, you could see Javier Aguirre being hoisted onto the shoulders of his players, tears of redemption streaming down his face. He spoke about belonging to a generation that finally took the step. He spoke about the people. In the other frame, paramedics were performing manual chest compressions on a 19-year-old girl on the dirty pavement of a side street. The joy and the death were happening in the same zip code, triggered by the same heartbeat. The fourth death is perhaps the most telling: cardiac arrest following seizures in a man in his 30s. This is what happens when the body is pushed to its absolute physiological limit by heat, dehydration, and the intense, sustained adrenaline of a crowd surge. It is a quiet death in a loud place. While the world watched replays of Gilberto Mora's vision, this man's world was narrowing down to a single, desperate struggle for a heartbeat. He died in a hospital, but his fate was sealed on the Reforma. There is a specific sadness in the fact that this was foreseeable. We saw the protests at the opening match. We saw the disorder in the streets during the group stages. The warnings were written in the chaos of every previous game. The city had already tried to mitigate the risk. They increased the number of screens. They tried to spread the crowd out. But the magnetic pull of the Angel of Independence is too strong. In the absence of a proper, centralized, and massive stadium-adjacent fan park that can actually handle 1 million people, the public will always default to the historical heart of the city. FIFA's response to these types of incidents is almost always a rehearsed script of condolences, followed by a quick pivot back to the magic of the tournament. They rely on the fact that the news cycle moves faster than a coroner's report. By the time the official cause of death is logged, the next match has kicked off. The goals act as a distraction. The drama of the bracket acts as a shroud. We are already talking about the England match on Sunday. We are already analyzing the tactical threat of Harry Kane versus the youthful energy of Mora. The business of the World Cup demands that we forget the dead to make room for the fans of tomorrow. But we cannot forget the mechanics of how this happened. If we call it an accident, we absolve the planners. If we call it unavoidable, we grant FIFA permission to keep pushing the boundaries of crowd density. The controlled collapse is a choice. It is the choice to prioritize the optics of a massive street party over the boring, expensive reality of crowd flow management and structural safety. It is the choice to host a knockout match in a megacity without the necessary tier of secondary safety zones. Sunday is coming. England is the opponent. This is not just another game. It is the biggest match in the history of modern Mexican football. If they win, the 1 million people who flooded the Reforma on Tuesday will look like a small gathering compared to what is coming. The Angel will be the epicenter again. The city is evaluating its plans. They are talking about more police, more barriers, more warnings. But barriers often make crowd crushes worse, creating dead ends where people are trapped. Police cordons can become the very walls that people are crushed against. There is a hollow feeling in the air now. The victory against Ecuador should have been the start of a week-long carnival. Instead, it feels like a wake. The families of the 4 victims are navigating a grief that is amplified by the fact that their loved ones died in the middle of a national party. Imagine trying to mourn while the rest of your city is singing. Imagine seeing the face of the player who scored the winning goal on every billboard, knowing that his goal was the starting gun for the surge that killed your daughter. This is the hidden cost of the modern game. We demand more teams, more games, more fans, and more atmosphere. We want the shots of the crowded streets because they validate the importance of the sport. We want the passion, but passion is a volatile fuel. When it is ignored by those in power, or worse, when it is exploited for its visual value without regard for its physical danger, people die. This wasn't a riot. There were no villains, no hooligans, no bad actors. There were just people who loved their country too much, and a system that didn't love them enough to keep them safe. The investigation will likely conclude that the city did its best under extraordinary circumstances. It will cite the unprecedented nature of the gathering. But in Mexico City, a 1 million-person gathering is not unprecedented. It is a Tuesday. The failure was in the arrogance of thinking that a standard safety plan could contain a 40-year explosion of joy. It was the failure to realize that when you market a game as life or death, some people will inevitably find the latter. As we look toward the England match, the pressure is building again. The streets are being cleaned, the broken bottles and discarded jerseys are being swept away. The giant screens are being tested, the city is bracing itself. But there is a silence underneath the preparation. It is the silence of the 4 who didn't come home. It is the silence of a 19-year-old girl who just wanted to see her country win. The stadium lights will come on again. The national anthem will be sung with a ferocity that will shake the foundations of the Azteca. Gilberto Mora will take the pitch, carrying the dreams of millions on his teenage shoulders. The world will watch, captivated by the drama, the skill, and the stakes. We will talk about the spirit of the Mexican fans. We will praise their unwavering support. We will use all the beautiful words that sports journalists use to describe a nation in the grip of a fever. But on the Paseo de la Reforma, near the base of the Angel, there will be 4 small spaces that can never be filled. There will be a reminder that behind every historic night, There is a ledger of human cost that FIFA never shows in its highlights reels. We are told that football is the most important of the least important things. On Tuesday night, for 4 families, that hierarchy was brutally reversed. The game ended, the score was settled, the history books were updated, and the oxygen never came back. The next time you see a drone shot of 1 million people screaming in a city square, don't just look at the colors. Look at the edges. Look at the places where the crowd meets the walls. Look for the sways and the surges. Remember that a crowd is not a collective. It is 1,000 individuals who all want to go home. On Sunday, the world will be watching the scoreboard. We should be watching the streets. The celebration is over. The investigation has begun. The next match is inevitable. The lights are bright. The streets are waiting. Keep your eyes on the crowd.